Cleaning lady was called for the interview to be humiliated, but when speaking 9 languages, everyone. The rain drummed against the cramped apartment windows like impatient fingers, each droplet carrying with it the weight of another sleepless night. Maria Elena Gonzalez sat cross-legged on the threadbare carpet, surrounded by cardboard boxes that held the remnants of her mother's life, a life that had ended 3 weeks ago in a sterile hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Her mother's final words still echoed in the silence. "Mija, there are things I should have told you. The blue box. Look in the blue box." Now, with trembling fingers that bore the calluses of 5 years spent scrubbing floors and polishing marble surfaces, Maria lifted the lid of a weathered jewelry box painted the color of forget-me-nots. The hinges protested with a soft creak, as if reluctant to release secrets that had been locked away for 3 decades. The first item she found was a photograph, faded at the edges, its colors muted by time. A young woman with Maria's same dark eyes and defiant chin stood beside a tall man with sandy hair and a smile that seemed to promise the world. The woman was unmistakably her mother, Isabella, but younger than Maria had ever seen her, radiant, in love. On the back, in her mother's careful script, Jonathan and Isabella, Barcelona, 1994. Before everything changed, Jonathan. The name landed in Maria's chest like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of recognition through memories she thought she had buried. Her mother had mentioned that name only once. During a fever-induced delirium when Maria was 16, she had dismissed it then as the ramblings of illness, but now, her hands moved deeper into the box, finding documents folded with the precision of someone who knew they might one day matter. Birth certificates, immigration papers, and then, a letter written on hotel stationery from the Ritz-Carlton, Barcelona, the ink slightly smudged as if tears had fallen on it before it dried. "My dearest Isabella, by the time you read this, I will be on a plane back to New York. My father has made it clear that my inheritance, my future, everything I've worked for, depends on leaving Spain immediately. He knows about us, about the baby, and he will never accept you into the Harrison family. I am a coward. I know this. I am choosing money over love, security over courage, and I will carry this shame for the rest of my life. But I also know that if I stay, he will destroy us both. The business he has built, the connections he has made, they reach further than you can imagine. Please don't hate me. Please tell our child that I love them, even if I wasn't strong enough to fight for that love. One day, when I have built something of my own, when I am no longer under his shadow, I will come back for you both. I promise, with all my love and deepest regret, Jonathan Harrison." The letter fluttered from Maria's numb fingers like a dying moth. Harrison. She knew that name. She had cleaned the nameplate on the corner office door every Tuesday and Thursday for 5 years. Jonathan Harrison, CEO, Sterling and Associates, the man who had abandoned her pregnant mother, who had chosen wealth over responsibility, who had promised to return, but never did. That man was her boss. The man whose trash she emptied, whose coffee stains she scrubbed from imported mahogany desks, whose very existence she had become invisible to. Maria's breath came in shallow gasps as the magnitude of the discovery crashed over her like a wave. She thought of all the times she had passed him in the pristine hallways of Sterling and Associates, how he looked through her as if she were made of air. She remembered the way he laughed at the company Christmas party while she served champagne in her crisp uniform, how he had stepped aside when she needed to clean around him, never once making eye contact. He didn't know. He had no idea that the woman who cleaned his office, who knew the combination to his safe because she had watched him enter it 100 times, who had memorized his schedule and his habits. He had no idea she was his daughter, but now she knew, and with that knowledge came a power that tasted bitter and sweet at the same time. Maria reached for the next document in the box, her original birth certificate from Barcelona, under father, where she had always seen unknown. The faded carbon copy revealed different text. Jonathan Michael Harrison, American citizen, businessman. Her mother had lied. For 30 years, Isabella had carried this secret, had let Maria believe she was unwanted by a man whose name didn't matter, but the truth was far more complex, far more painful. Her father hadn't been some stranger who disappeared into the night. He was a man who had made a choice, money over family, comfort over courage. The rain outside intensified, matching the storm building in Maria's chest. She thought of her life in pieces, her childhood in Barcelona, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to pay for her education, her university years, studying languages with a hunger that surprised her professors. Her time at the United Nations, where she had translated the hopes and fears of diplomats from 9 different countries, where she had been respected, valued, seen, and then the accident, the call that had shattered her world like glass. Luis, her husband, crushed in a construction accident that could have been prevented if his employer had followed safety regulations, the lawsuit that went nowhere because they were immigrants without connections, the spiral into depression that cost her everything, her job, her reputation, her sense of self. She had come to America not in pursuit of dreams, but running from nightmares, and in her desperation to survive, to eat, to keep a roof over her head, she had taken the first job she could find, cleaning offices for minimum wage, invisible and forgotten. But fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Maria stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She walked to the small mirror hanging beside her kitchen sink and stared at her reflection. The face looking back at her bore traces of the man in the photograph, the strong jawline, the deep-set eyes, even the way her eyebrows arched when she was thinking. How had he not seen it? How had no one at the company noticed the resemblance? The answer came to her with brutal clarity. Because they didn't look at her. Not really. She was part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible and unremarkable as the ventilation system or the security cameras. She existed in their peripheral vision, necessary but unnoticed. Tomorrow, she would return to Sterling and Associates. She would put on her blue uniform and her comfortable shoes. She would gather her cleaning supplies from the storage closet in the basement, and she would take the service elevator to the executive floors. She would dust the frames holding his business awards. She would water the plants in his corner office, and she would empty the wastebasket beside his massive desk. But everything would be different now, because now she knew who she was. She knew why her mother had taught her to speak 9 languages, why education had been so important to her, why Isabella had always said, "You are destined for more than this, mija. You have greatness in your blood." The greatness wasn't in her blood, it was in her choices. And tomorrow, Maria Elena Gonzalez would begin making very different choices indeed. Outside, the rain began to subside, but inside the small apartment, a storm was just beginning to brew. Maria folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the blue box, but she left the photograph on her small dining table where she could see it. The man who had abandoned her mother was about to discover that some children grow up to be reckoned with, and Maria had 30 years of abandonment to make him answer for. The Sterling and Associates building pierced the Manhattan skyline like a steel and glass dagger, its 47 floors housing the dreams and ambitions of some of the most powerful people in international business. At 6:30 in the morning, when the city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes, Maria pushed through the service entrance on West 47th Street, her keycard granting her access to a world that existed in the shadows of success. The basement levels were a different universe entirely. Here, beneath the polished marble and imported leather of the executive floors, was where the real work happened. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the youngest faces look tired. The walls were painted institutional green, a color that seemed designed to remind everyone down here of their place in the hierarchy. "Morning, Maria." Ana Morales looked up from the industrial sink where she was filling her cleaning cart, her round face creased with a smile that had survived 23 years of early mornings and aching backs. At 58, Ana had the kind of weathered beauty that spoke of resilience. Silver threads woven through her black hair like precious metal, laugh lines that mapped out decades of finding joy in small things. "Buenos dias, Ana." Maria's voice carried a weight that made her friend look twice. "¿Qué pasa, mija? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only it were that simple. Maria thought. Ghosts, at least, stayed in the past where they belonged. Just tired. Couldn't sleep. Anna studied her with the keen eye of someone who had raised 4 children and could spot a lie from across a room. But she simply nodded and handed Maria her spray bottles. "The 38th floor needs extra attention today, mister. Sterling wants everything perfect for the board meeting." The mention of Richard Sterling sent a familiar chill down Maria's spine. Even before her world-shattering discovery, Sterling had represented everything she despised about this place. The casual cruelty disguised as humor, the way he looked at the cleaning staff like they were somehow less than human. They worked in comfortable silence as they loaded their carts. The ritual as familiar as breathing, disinfectant, glass cleaner, furniture polish that smelled like fake lemons, microfiber cloths that cost more per dozen than most people here made in a day. The irony wasn't lost on Maria that she was polishing surfaces worth more than her annual salary, with tools that cost more than her weekly groceries. The service elevator carried them up through the building's hidden arteries. Stopping at different floors to drop off other members of their invisible army, Maria watched through the small window as they passed floor after floor of sleeping offices, each one a testament to power and wealth that felt both foreign and familiar. When they reached the executive levels, everything changed. The elevator doors opened onto a world of hushed luxury, Persian rugs that cost more than cars, original artwork that belonged in museums, furniture crafted by artisans whose names appeared in design magazines. The air itself seemed different here, perfumed with success and privilege. "I'll take the East Wing," Anna whispered, though there was no one around to hear them. Something about these floors made everyone speak in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the dreams of the powerful. Maria nodded and pushed her cart toward the corner office that had been both her destination and her burden for 5 years. Jonathan Harrison's office occupied the building's prime real estate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Central Park that real estate agents would describe as priceless. She had been in this office hundreds of times. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't just the invisible woman who emptied trash and watered plants. Today, she was his daughter, studying the space that held the life he had built instead of the family he had abandoned. The office was a study in controlled power. The massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface polished to mirror perfection. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than functional, classics chosen by an interior designer rather than personal preference. The walls displayed his achievements, degrees from Harvard and Wharton, awards from international business councils, photographs with politicians and celebrities, but it was the small details that caught Maria's attention now. A sterling silver letter opener engraved with J.M.H., the same initials on the birth certificate hidden in her apartment, a coffee mug with a chip on the handle that he refused to replace, a humanizing flaw in an otherwise perfect facade, and there, almost hidden behind a stack of quarterly reports, a small framed photograph of a Spanish sunset that could have been taken in Barcelona. Maria's hands trembled as she dusted the frame. Had he kept this all these years as a reminder of what he'd left behind? Or was it simply a generic vacation photo, meaningless and forgotten like the woman who had once watched sunsets with him? He gets in early on Tuesdays. Maria spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Anna stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "What?" "Mr. Harrison, he's usually here by 7:30 on Tuesdays. It's almost 7:15 now." Anna stepped into the office, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes, staring at that picture like it holds the secrets of the universe." Maria forced herself to move, picking up her cleaning cloth with hands that felt like lead. "I was just thinking." "About what? And don't tell me it's nothing. I've known you for 5 years, Maria. I've watched you clean this office with the efficiency of a machine. Today, you're moving like you're afraid to touch anything." The weight of the secret pressed against Maria's chest like a physical force. For 5 years, Anna had been her anchor in this place, the one person who saw her as more than just a uniform and a cleaning cart. But how could she explain that everything had changed overnight? That the man whose trash they emptied every week was the father who had abandoned her before she was born? "Anna," Maria's voice caught in her throat, "if you discovered something about yourself, something that changed everything you thought you knew, what would you do?" Anna's weathered hand stilled on the handle of her cart. "That depends on what kind of something we're talking about." Before Maria could answer, the soft chime of the elevator announced someone's arrival. Both women froze, their hearts racing with the guilty knowledge that they weren't supposed to be caught lingering in the executive offices. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, accompanied by a voice that made Maria's blood run cold. "And I want those quarterly projections on my desk before the meeting. I don't care if Henderson has to work all night to finish them." Richard Sterling's voice carried the particular brand of arrogance that came from a man who had never been told no in any meaningful way. At 38, he had climbed the corporate ladder with the ruthless efficiency of a predator, leaving behind a trail of destroyed careers and broken spirits. "And make sure the cleaning crew doesn't touch anything in the conference room. I caught one of them reading a client proposal last week. These people need to remember their place." Maria's jaw clenched. She remembered that incident. Senora Rodriguez, a grandmother of 7 who could barely read English, had been fired for glancing at papers while dusting. The accusation of industrial espionage had been as ridiculous as it was cruel, but it had been enough to destroy a woman's livelihood. Anna grabbed Maria's arm, pulling her toward the supply closet. They huddled in the darkness among the cleaning supplies, barely breathing as Sterling's footsteps approached the office. "Remember what I told you about staying invisible?" Anna whispered, her voice so low it was barely audible. "Men like that, they don't see us as people. We're furniture to them. And furniture doesn't have feelings or opinions or secrets." But as Maria crouched in the darkness, listening to Sterling's voice grow closer, she realized that being invisible had been both her protection and her prison. For 5 years, she had cleaned up after the messes of people who would never know her name, who would never see her as anything more than a necessary inconvenience. But now she knew the truth. Now she understood that she wasn't just invisible by choice. She was invisible because the man who should have been looking for her his entire life had never even tried to find her. The anger that had been simmering since her discovery the night before began to boil over. These people, with their corner offices and their casual cruelty, had no idea what real struggle looked like. They had no idea that the woman who polished their awards and watered their plants was more educated than half of them, had traveled more extensively, spoke more languages, and had more real-world experience than their Ivy League degrees could ever provide. Sterling's footsteps passed by the closet, and Maria felt Anna's grip on her arm relax. But something inside her had hardened, crystallized into a determination that felt as sharp and clear as cut glass. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed and overlooked and treated like a piece of the building's infrastructure. And if Richard Sterling wanted to remind people of their place, Maria decided it was time to show him exactly what her place could be. Richard Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 36th floor office, like a general surveying a battlefield he had already won. The morning sun caught the angles of his face, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that seemed carved from marble, eyes the color of winter ice. At 38, he possessed the kind of aggressive handsomeness that had opened doors throughout his life, paired with the intelligence that he wielded like a surgeon's scalpel. Precise, efficient, and often devastating, his office was a monument to calculated intimidation. The walls were painted charcoal gray, creating an atmosphere that made visitors feel like they were being judged by shadows. His desk, a massive slab of black granite imported from Italy, dominated the space like an altar to corporate power. Behind it hung his diplomas, MBA from Wharton, bachelor's from Yale, and photographs of him shaking hands with senators, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries who had learned to fear his reputation. "Marissa," his voice cut through the morning quiet like a blade. "Where's my coffee?" His assistant, a nervous 24-year-old fresh from Colombia, hurried in with a steaming cup balanced on a silver tray. Marissa Chen had lasted longer than most, 3 months and counting, primarily because she had learned to anticipate his moods and disappear when the storm clouds gathered. "Here, Mr. Sterling. Ethiopian single origin, medium roast, no cream, no sugar, exactly 165 degrees. She set the cup down with the precision of someone who knew that imperfection meant replacement. Richard didn't acknowledge her effort. He never did. In his world, people were either useful or disposable, and acknowledging competence implied that he expected anything less than perfection. The Henderson Report. On your desk. Sir, along with the quarterly projections you requested and the preliminary schedules for next week's client presentations. Sterling's eyes swept across the documents with the speed of someone trained to process information at superhuman rates. His mind worked like a computer, calculating profit margins, risk assessments, and strategic advantages with the cold efficiency that had made him the youngest senior partner in Sterling & Associates history. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The hunger that drove Richard Sterling wasn't for money or success in any traditional sense. It was for control, for the exquisite pleasure of bending the world to his will, of watching people dance to music only he could hear. He had discovered this hunger early, first in boarding school, where he had learned to manipulate teachers and torment weaker students with equal skill. Then in college, where he had refined his abilities on professors and classmates alike. The corporate world had been his natural hunting ground. "Cancel my 10 o'clock, he said without looking up from the Henderson file. "I want to observe the cleaning staff for a few hours." Marissa's pen paused over her notepad. "Sir, the cleaning staff. I want to see how they operate when they think no one's watching." He finally raised his eyes, and Marissa suppressed a shiver at the predatory gleam she saw there. "Knowledge is power, Marissa. And the most valuable knowledge is what people don't know you have." It wasn't the first time Sterling had made such a request. He had built his reputation on finding weaknesses. In business deals, in competitor strategies, in the people around him. He collected secrets like other men collected vintage wines, storing them away until the perfect moment to uncork them. The cleaning staff had always fascinated him in the way that insects fascinate entomologists. They moved through the building's arteries with their carts and their uniforms, invisible and necessary, like some lower species that existed solely to serve their betters. And like all lower species, they could be studied, categorized, and ultimately controlled. He remembered the Rodriguez incident with particular satisfaction. The old woman had been getting too comfortable, too familiar with the executives, asking about their families and their weekends as if she were a friend rather than hired help. The accusation of reading confidential documents had been fiction, of course, but it had served its purpose. It reminded everyone, staff and executives alike, that there were boundaries that could not be crossed without consequences. "Should I reschedule your appointment with the Morrison Group?" Marissa asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow, same time?" Sterling moved to his window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up beneath him. From this height, people looked like ants, scurrying about their insignificant lives without any understanding of the forces that truly controlled their destinies. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Board meeting prep complete. The Harrison situation requires delicate handling." Ah, yes, the Harrison situation. Jonathan Harrison, the aging CEO who had been showing troubling signs of softness lately, talking about company culture and employee satisfaction, as if Sterling and Associates were some kind of charity organization rather than a predatory machine designed to extract maximum profit from minimum investment. Harrison had built the company through intelligence and ruthless ambition, qualities Sterling respected. But now, at 67, the old man seemed to be developing something resembling a conscience. He had been asking questions about employee benefits, about working conditions for the support staff, about whether they were creating value for all stakeholders. It was disgusting, and it was dangerous. Sterling's father, Robert Sterling, sat on the board of directors and had been grooming his son for years to eventually take control of the company. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Undermine Harrison's authority gradually, position Richard as the natural successor, and execute a boardroom coup when the moment was right. The only complication was Harrison's reputation. The man was beloved by clients, respected by competitors, and had built Sterling and Associates into one of the most successful consulting firms in the world. Any move against him would need to be surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating. Sterling smiled, the expression transforming his handsome features into something that would have made medieval artists reach for their brushes to paint demons. He had been patient, gathering intelligence and building alliances for 3 years. Soon, very soon, it would be time to strike. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Jonathan Harrison entered the office with the easy confidence of a man who had been commanding respect for 4 decades. At 67, he still carried himself like the Harvard quarterback he had once been. Though silver now threaded through his sandy hair and lines mapped the corners of his eyes, he wore his authority like a well-tailored suit, comfortable, understated, and undeniable. "Richard, I wanted to discuss the Morrison Group presentation with you." "Of course." Sterling gestured to the chairs facing his desk, noting with satisfaction that Harrison chose to remain standing. Small dominance games were part of the dance they performed daily. "I've been reviewing their requirements, and I think we need to approach this differently than usual." Harrison's voice carried the weight of experience, but also something else, a wariness that hadn't been there a year ago. "Oh, they're specifically interested in our employee retention rates, our diversity initiatives, our commitment to ethical business practices." Harrison paused, studying Sterling's face. "These aren't traditional metrics for a consulting engagement." Sterling set down his coffee with calculated precision. "Are you suggesting we fabricate data to meet their requirements?" "I'm suggesting we actually implement the policies they're asking about." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Perhaps it's time Sterling and Associates evolved beyond simply maximizing profits. And there it was, the weakness Sterling had been waiting for. Harrison wasn't just developing a conscience. He was actively working against everything the company had been built on. The old man was practically handing him the ammunition for his own destruction. "That's a fascinating perspective," Sterling said, his voice silk over steel. "Though I wonder if our shareholders would appreciate such philosophical experiments with their investments." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "The shareholders will appreciate sustainable growth over short-term profits. They'll appreciate a company that attracts top talent and retains client loyalty through ethical practices rather than fear." "Fear." Sterling allowed a note of surprise to color his voice. "That's a strong word. Is it?" When was the last time you had a conversation with our support staff, Richard? When did you last ask Marissa about her career goals, rather than simply demanding she fetch your coffee? Harrison stepped closer to the desk. When did you last treat another human being like they mattered? The question hit Sterling like a physical blow, not because it wounded him, but because it revealed how far Harrison had fallen. The man who had once crushed competitors without hesitation was now worried about the feelings of secretaries and janitors. "I'll take your suggestions under advisement," Sterling said, his tone suggesting the conversation was over, but Harrison didn't move. "I'm not making suggestions, Richard. I'm telling you how things are going to change around here, starting with how we treat our employees." After Harrison left, Sterling sat in his chair for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities and calculations. The old man had just declared war without realizing it. He had shown his hand, revealed his weakness, and provided the perfect opportunity for his own downfall. Sterling reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Father, it's time to accelerate our timeline. Harrison just gave us everything we need." The company-wide email arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would later be remembered as the day everything changed. Maria was emptying waste baskets on the 23rd floor when her supervisor's voice crackled through the building's intercom system, calling all cleaning staff to the basement conference room. The basement conference room was a generous name for what was essentially a storage area, with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were suffering from a terminal illness. Maria filed in with the other members of the cleaning crew, mostly women, mostly immigrants, mostly invisible to the gleaming world above their heads. Mrs. Patterson, the facilities manager, stood at the front of the room with the expression of someone delivering news she didn't particularly care about. At 55, she had the demeanor of a high school principal who had given up on the system years ago, but still needed the paycheck. "Ladies," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who managed people she would never invite to dinner, "Sterling and Associates is expanding their international division. They're looking for an executive assistant for international relations." A murmur rippled through the room. Executive assistant positions were the stuff of dreams for women like them. Real salaries, health benefits, the possibility of being seen as something more than human furniture. The position requires fluency in multiple languages, international business experience, and Mrs. Patterson paused, reading from her notes with the tone of someone reciting a grocery list. Strong organizational skills and attention to detail. Maria's heart began to race. Multiple languages, international business experience. The job description might as well have been written specifically for her former life, the life she had buried beneath years of industrial-strength cleaning products and minimum-wage humiliation. "Now, I know what you're all thinking," Mrs. Patterson continued, and Maria doubted very much that she had any idea what any of them were thinking. "But Mr. Sterling specifically requested that we post this opportunity internally first. Everyone deserves a chance to better themselves." The words hung in the air like smoke, beautiful and insubstantial. Maria looked around the room at her colleagues. Ana, whose hands were permanently stained from chemicals. Senora Rodriguez's replacement, a young mother named Carmen, who spoke 3 words of English. Mrs. Chen, who had been cleaning these offices longer than some of the executives had been alive. They were good women, hardworking women, but none of them had spent 5 years translating for diplomats at the United Nations. None of them had degrees from the University of Barcelona or fluency in 9 languages or experience negotiating with international business leaders. None of them was the daughter of the man who owned the company. "Applications are due by Friday," Mrs. Patterson announced. "Interviews will be conducted next week." After the meeting dispersed, Anna cornered Maria by the service elevator. "You're going to apply." It wasn't a question. Anna had the kind of intuition that came from raising 4 children and surviving 23 years in a world that tried to make women like them disappear. No. Anna held up a hand that bore the scars of decades spent scrubbing other people's messes. "Don't tell me you're not qualified. Don't tell me you're not smart enough. I've watched you for 5 years. Maria, I've seen you reading the newspapers the executives throw away. I've heard you on the phone with your landlord, switching between English and Spanish like you're changing television channels." Maria felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "It's complicated. Life is complicated, mija. But opportunities like this." Anna gestured toward the conference room where Mrs. Patterson was collecting her papers. "They don't come around twice." That afternoon, while cleaning the executive floors, Maria found herself moving differently through the hallways. Instead of keeping her eyes down and her presence minimal, she observed everything. She noted which executives left early and which ones stayed late. She listened to conversations about client needs and market trends. She paid attention to the artwork on the walls, originals from artists she recognized from her university art history courses. She was gathering intelligence, though for what purpose, she wasn't entirely sure yet. It was while cleaning the conference room on the 40th floor that she overheard the conversation that would change everything. Absolutely brilliant idea. Richard, the voice belonged to Marcus Webb, one of the junior partners, whose main qualification seemed to be his ability to laugh at Richard Sterling's jokes. A cleaning lady applying for an executive position. The entertainment value alone makes it worthwhile. Maria froze behind the supply cart, her hands gripping a bottle of glass cleaner so tightly her knuckles went white. Oh, it's much more than entertainment. Sterling's voice carried the particular tone he used when he was planning something cruel. It's a teaching moment, for them and for the executives who think we should be more inclusive in our hiring practices. You mean Harrison? Exactly. Jonathan has been pushing this diversity nonsense for months. Something about creating opportunities for underprivileged workers. Sterling's laugh was like ice cracking. Well, let's give him exactly what he asked for. Maria's breath caught in her throat. They were talking about the job posting, about her colleagues, about her... So you'll actually interview one of them? Webb sounded incredulous. Oh, I'll do better than that. I'll interview the one who applies, publicly, in front of the senior staff. Sterling's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. I'll ask her questions about international trade agreements and currency fluctuations and diplomatic protocol. I'll watch her squirm and stumble and eventually break down completely. That seems cruel, even for you. It's not cruel, Marcus. It's educational. These people need to understand their limitations. They need to remember their place in the natural order. Sterling's chair creaked as he leaned back. And Harrison needs to see what happens when we try to promote people beyond their capabilities. Maria's hands began to shake. The glass cleaner slipped from her grip and rolled under the conference table with a sound that seemed to echo like thunder in the sudden silence. What was that? Webb's voice was sharp with suspicion. Maria held her breath, pressing herself against the supply cart as footsteps approached her hiding spot. Through the gap between the cart and the wall, she could see Sterling's Italian leather shoes, polished to mirror perfection. Probably just the building settling, he said finally, but his voice carried a note of suspicion. These old buildings make all sorts of noises. They returned to their conversation. But Maria was no longer listening. Her mind was racing through possibilities and implications, and the sudden crystal-clear understanding of what she needed to do. Richard Sterling wanted to humiliate a cleaning lady to prove a point about social hierarchy. He wanted to use one of her colleagues as a prop in his power game with Jonathan Harrison. He wanted to demonstrate that people like them should know their place and stay in it. But what if the cleaning lady he chose to humiliate wasn't what he expected? What if she could answer his questions about international trade agreements and currency fluctuations and diplomatic protocol? What if she spoke 9 languages and had negotiated with ambassadors and had forgotten more about international business than he had ever learned? What if Richard Sterling's teaching moment became her opportunity for justice? Maria crept out of the conference room with her heart pounding and her mind made up. She would apply for the position. She would walk into Sterling's trap with her eyes wide open, and when he tried to humiliate her in front of the senior staff, she would show him exactly what happened when someone underestimated their prey. But first, she needed to decide how much of her hand to reveal. The job application would be her opening move in a game. Sterling didn't even know he was playing. She could play it safe, list her cleaning experience and basic qualifications, and hope for the best. Or she could begin laying the groundwork for the most satisfying moment of revenge she could imagine. That evening, sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a blank application form, Maria Elena Gonzalez began planning the downfall of Richard Sterling, and as she wrote, she found herself smiling for the first time in 5 years. Tomorrow, she would hand in an application that would change everything. Tonight, she would allow herself to dream of the look on Sterling's face when he realized he had chosen the wrong victim. The hunt was about to begin, and Richard Sterling had no idea he had just become the prey. The Sterling and Associates building transformed after midnight into something resembling a sleeping giant. The marble corridors that hummed with ambition during business hours now echoed with the whispered conversations of the night shift. Security guards making their rounds, janitors from the overnight crew, and Maria, who had volunteered for extra shifts with a sudden enthusiasm that surprised her supervisor. "You sure you want to work doubles this week?" Mrs. Patterson had asked, squinting at Maria over her reading glasses. The overtime pay isn't much. I could use the money, Maria had replied, which was true enough, but money was only part of her motivation. What she really needed was access, time to study the building's rhythms, to understand the systems that powered the empire her father had built, and to gather the intelligence that would transform her from victim to victor. Now, at 2:15 in the morning, Maria pushed her cart through the 38th floor with purpose. During the day, these offices buzzed with the energy of deal-making and power brokering. At night, they were libraries of secrets, and Maria had become their most dedicated scholar. She had developed a system over the past 3 nights. First, she completed her assigned cleaning tasks with mechanical efficiency, emptying trash, wiping surfaces, vacuuming carpets. But then, when the building settled into its deepest sleep, she began her real work. The executive offices were treasure troves of information for someone who knew what to look for. Contracts left on desks revealed client expectations and project timelines. Email printouts discarded in wastebaskets provided insights into internal politics and strategic decisions. Wall calendars showed meeting schedules and travel plans that painted pictures of the company's international reach. But it was the documents in Jonathan Harrison's office that told the most interesting story. Maria had been cleaning his office for 5 years, but she had never really looked at it, not with the eyes of someone who understood international business, who could read between the lines of corporate strategy, who recognized the subtle indicators of a company in transition. Harrison's desk revealed a man under pressure. The quarterly reports were marked with handwritten notes expressing concern about employee satisfaction surveys. There were printouts of articles about corporate social responsibility, about sustainable business practices, about the changing expectations of millennial workers. In his trash, she found multiple drafts of memos about improving working conditions for support staff, each version more cautious than the last. It was the photograph that stopped her cold. Though, half hidden beneath a stack of merger proposals was a small framed picture she had never noticed before. A Spanish beach at sunset, the golden light reflecting off waves that could have been from any Mediterranean coast. But Maria recognized the distinctive rocks jutting from the water, the particular way the light fell across the sand. Playa de la Barceloneta, the beach where her mother had taken her every Sunday as a child. Her hands trembled as she lifted the frame. On the back, in faded ink, Barcelona, 1994, never forgotten. The year she was born, the year he had abandoned her mother. Maria set the photograph down carefully, her mind reeling. For 30 years, Jonathan Harrison had kept a reminder of Barcelona on his desk, not hidden away in a drawer, not stored in some forgotten box, but right there where he could see it every day. What did that mean? Was it guilt, regret, or simply nostalgia for a time when his choices had been simpler? Maria, ¿qué haces aquí tan tarde? She spun around to find Anna standing in the doorway, her own cleaning cart beside her. At nearly 3 in the morning, Anna looked tired but alert, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the scene. I'm working extra shifts, Maria stammered, suddenly aware of how suspicious her behavior must appear. I can see that. Anna stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. What I can't understand is why you're staring at Mr. Harrison's personal photographs instead of emptying his trash. There was no judgment in Anna's voice, only curiosity and concern. In the 5 years they had worked together, Anna had become more than a colleague. She had become the closest thing to family Maria had in this country. If she was going to trust anyone with the truth, it would be Anna. What do you know about Mr. Harrison? Maria asked quietly. Jonathan Harrison. Anna settled into one of the leather chairs facing the desk, ignoring the implicit rule that cleaning staff never sat in clients' furniture. He's been here longer than anyone. Built this company from nothing, they say. Smart man. Fair, mostly. Better than most of the executives when it comes to treating us like human beings. What about his personal life? Anna's eyebrows rose. Why do you want to know? Maria looked at the photograph in her hands, at the sunset that represented the moment her life had been decided by other people. Because I think he might be my father. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Anna's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, skepticism, calculation, and finally, a kind of understanding that suggested she was remembering details she had previously dismissed. Dios mío, Anna whispered. The eyes. You have his eyes. You see it too. I should have seen it years ago. The way you carry yourself, the way you think before you speak. Anna leaned forward, studying Maria's face in the soft light from the desk lamp. "How long have you known?" 3 days. I found documents in my mother's things after she died. Maria's voice broke slightly on the word died. Even 3 weeks later, the loss felt fresh and raw. "And you're sure?" Maria showed her the photograph, explained about the birth certificate, about the letter that had revealed 30 years of lies and abandonment. Anna listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "What are you going to do?" Anna asked finally. "I don't know. I thought maybe I could get to know him first, understand what kind of man he is before I decide whether to tell him the truth. And the job application." Maria hesitated. She hadn't told Anna about Sterling's cruel plan, about the humiliation he was plotting. "It's an opportunity to show what I'm capable of. It's more than that." Anna's voice carried the weight of years spent observing office politics from the invisible margins. "That job posting wasn't about creating opportunities. It was about making a point." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Richard Sterling doesn't do anything without a reason, and his reasons are never kind." Anna stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the sleeping city. "I've been watching that man for 3 years, Maria. He's dangerous. Not just ambitious. Dangerous. How? He destroys people, systematically. Carefully, he finds their weaknesses and exploits them until they have nothing left." Anna's reflection in the window looked older, wearier. "You remember Senora Rodriguez?" "Of course. The documents she was supposedly reading. I saw them. They were press releases about the company's charitable donations, public information. Nothing confidential." Anna turned back to face Maria. "But Sterling needed to make an example of someone, and she was convenient." The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. "You think he's planning to do the same thing to whoever applies for this job?" "I think Richard Sterling doesn't know the difference between entertainment and cruelty." Anna's voice carried decades of accumulated wisdom. "And I think he's about to learn that some prey bites back." Over the next hour, Anna helped Maria gather intelligence with the efficiency of a spy network. Anna knew which executives stayed late, which ones left confidential documents on their desks, which conversations happened behind closed doors. Together, they mapped out Sterling's schedule, his habits, his routines. But more importantly, Anna helped Maria understand the company's current projects, the clients they were courting, the international deals they were negotiating. By dawn, Maria had accumulated enough inside knowledge to impress even the most demanding interviewer. "There's something else," Anna said as they prepared to leave. "Something you should know about your father." "What?" "He's been asking questions about employee satisfaction, about working conditions, about whether we feel valued here." Anna's expression was thoughtful. "It started about 6 months ago, like he was suddenly seeing us for the first time." "What kind of questions?" "Personal ones, about our families, our backgrounds, our dreams." Anna smiled sadly. "I told him about my daughter's graduation from nursing school. He sent flowers to the ceremony." The information shifted something in Maria's chest. The man who had abandoned her mother wasn't entirely heartless, but was kindness to his employees enough to forgive 30 years of abandonment. That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began planning the most important performance of her life. She would walk into Sterling's trap, but she would do it armed with knowledge, preparation, and 30 years of accumulated rage refined into surgical precision. She wrote out her responses to every possible question about international business, practicing until the words flowed like water. She researched Sterling & Associates' current clients, memorizing names and project details that would demonstrate not just competence, but intimate knowledge of the company's operations. But most importantly, she prepared for the moment when she would reveal her true identity, the moment when the daughter Jonathan Harrison had never looked for would force him to see her at last. The application she finally submitted was a masterpiece of strategic revelation. She listed her cleaning experience honestly, but also included her university education, her unwork, and her language fluencies. Not enough to raise immediate suspicions, but more than enough to suggest she was not what she appeared to be. As she slipped the application under Mrs. Patterson's door, Maria felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders. In 72 hours, she would walk into Sterling's conference room not as a victim, but as the instrument of justice 30 years in the making. The hunt was about to begin, and neither Richard Sterling nor Jonathan Harrison had any idea what was coming for them. The conference room on the 40th floor had been transformed into a gladiatorial arena disguised as a business meeting. Sterling had arranged the seating with surgical precision, a single chair facing a semicircle of leather executive seats, positioned so that the morning sun would shine directly into the interviewee's eyes, while leaving the panel in comfortable shadow. Maria stood outside the polished mahogany doors at exactly 9 o'clock, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a simple black dress she had worn to her mother's funeral, paired with the only blazer she owned and shoes that had cost her 2 weeks' wages 5 years ago, professional enough to show respect for the process, humble enough to maintain her cover, but beneath the carefully constructed exterior, she was armor-plated with preparation. Every possible question had been anticipated, every response rehearsed until it flowed like natural conversation. She carried 5 years of insider knowledge, 30 years of suppressed anger, and the accumulated wisdom of a woman who had learned to survive in a world that had never wanted her. Miss Gonzalez. Marissa Chen appeared beside her, tablet in hand and nervous energy radiating from her like heat. "They're ready for you." The doors opened to reveal Sterling's carefully orchestrated theater of humiliation. 6 executives sat in judgment, Sterling himself at the center like a king holding court, flanked by Marcus Webb, Patricia Morrison from Human Resources, David Kim from International Relations, Sarah Chen from Legal, and at the far end, Jonathan Harrison. Maria's breath caught as she saw her father for the first time as his daughter rather than his employee. From across the conference table, she could see the details she had never noticed before, the way his left eyebrow had a small scar that interrupted the hair growth, the particular shade of brown in his eyes that matched her own, the way his fingers drummed against the table when he was thinking. He looked tired, older than his 67 years, with the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. But there was kindness in his face, a gentleness that she had observed from a distance but never experienced firsthand. "Please have a seat," Sterling said, his voice carrying the particular tone he used when he was enjoying himself. "We're all very curious to hear what you have to say." Maria sat down, adjusting to the calculated disadvantage of the lighting. The sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows created a halo effect that made it difficult to see her interrogators clearly. But she had expected this. Sterling's psychological warfare was textbook. Isolate the target, control the environment, maintain visual dominance. "So," Sterling began, consulting a file that Maria suspected contained more entertainment value than actual questions. "Maria Elena Gonzalez, 5 years with our cleaning staff, impeccable attendance record." He looked up with a smile that belonged in a shark documentary. "Tell us, Miss Gonzalez, what makes you think you're qualified for an executive assistant position?" The question was designed to be impossible to answer well. How does someone explain that they're overqualified for a job they're supposedly underqualified for? How does a cleaning lady justify aspiring to the executive suite? But Maria had spent 30 years learning to navigate impossible situations. "Mr. Sterling, in my 5 years here, I've had the privilege of observing Sterling and Associates operations from a unique perspective," she began, her voice steady and confident. "I've seen how international projects develop from conception to completion. I've watched client relationships evolve. I've observed the challenges that arise when cultural differences aren't properly understood or respected." Sterling's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the stammering, intimidated response he had expected. "That's observational," Marcus Webb interjected. "But what actual experience do you have with international business?" Maria turned to face him, switching seamlessly into flawless French. "Monsieur Webb, j'ai passé 5 années comme interprète aux Nations Unies, travaillant avec des diplomates de 43 pays différents." The room fell silent. Webb's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I'm sorry," Sterling said, his voice sharp with irritation. "Could you repeat that in English for those of us who didn't attend, wherever you learned French?" "Of course." Maria's smile was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. "I said that I spent 5 years as an interpreter at the United Nations, working with diplomats from 43 different countries." The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Maria could see the exact moment when Sterling realized that his carefully planned humiliation had just become something else entirely. The United Nations. Patricia Morrison leaned forward, her professional curiosity overriding the script. "In what capacity?" "Conference interpreter. Primarily, I specialized in trade negotiations and diplomatic protocols. My language certifications include Spanish, French, Italian, German, Portuguese, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic, and Russian." As she spoke each language, Maria delivered a brief sentence in that tongue, her accent perfect, her fluency undeniable. The executives' faces registered shock, confusion, and in Sterling's case, something approaching panic. Jonathan Harrison had gone very still, his eyes fixed on Maria's face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She could see him processing details, the shape of her nose, the color of her eyes, the way she moved her hands when she spoke. "Miss Gonzalez," David Kim found his voice first. "If you have this level of education and experience, why are you working as... Why have I been cleaning your offices for 5 years?" Maria finished his question with a smile that contained no warmth. "Because sometimes life forces us to make choices we never imagined we would need to make. Because tragedy can destroy careers as easily as it destroys hearts. Because this country doesn't always value what immigrants bring to the table." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "But also because observation from the invisible margins provides insights that executive briefings cannot. I know, for instance, that the Morrison Group is concerned about your employee retention rates because I've emptied Mr. Sterling's trash and seen their correspondence. I know that the Japanese delegation next month will expect very specific cultural protocols because I've overheard the planning meetings. I know that your current approach to the European market is failing because I've read the client feedback reports that executives discard without fully reviewing." Sterling's face had gone white. "You've been spying on us. I've been doing my job, Mr. Sterling. You've simply never bothered to consider what my job allows me to see." Maria's voice carried the authority of someone who had found her ground and intended to hold it. "The question isn't whether I'm qualified for this position. The question is whether Sterling and Associates is ready to value competence over prejudice." Jonathan Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Gonzalez, what did you say your full name was?" Maria's heart stopped. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the confrontation she had dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. "Maria Elena Gonzalez Harrison," she said clearly, letting each syllable fall like a stone into still water. The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. She could see recognition dawning in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hope, or might have been terror. "That's impossible," he breathed. "Is it?" Maria reached into her purse and withdrew the photograph she had carried with her, the one of her parents in Barcelona, young and in love, and convinced they had forever. She placed it on the conference table where everyone could see it. Barcelona, 1994, before everything changed. Jonathan Harrison's composure cracked like ice under pressure. His hands shook as he reached for the photograph, his face cycling through decades of suppressed guilt and desperate hope. "Isabella," he whispered. Where is... She died 3 weeks ago." Maria's voice was steady, but tears had begun to form in her eyes. "Cancer. She never married. She never forgot you." The conference room erupted into chaos. Sterling was shouting questions. The other executives were talking over each other. But Maria only had eyes for her father as 30 years of abandonment and longing collapsed into this single moment of recognition. Jonathan Harrison looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in her life, and in his eyes, she saw not the cold executive who had built an empire, but a broken man who had been carrying the weight of his worst decision for 3 decades. "Mija," he whispered, using the Spanish endearment her mother had taught her was his favorite. "My daughter. My God, what have I done?" The aftermath of Maria's revelation hung over Sterling and Associates like smoke after an explosion. In the 3 days following the interview, the building buzzed with whispered conversations and furtive glances. Word had spread through the corporate ecosystem with the speed of wildfire. The cleaning lady who spoke 9 languages, the daughter who had been hiding in plain sight, the moment when Jonathan Harrison's carefully constructed world had crumbled in a conference room on the 40th floor. Jonathan had not returned to his office since that Tuesday morning. His assistant fielded calls with practiced diplomacy, explaining that Mr. Harrison was dealing with urgent family matters. But Maria, cleaning the executive floors with the same mechanical precision she had maintained for 5 years, could see the truth written in the abandoned coffee cups and unopened mail that accumulated on his desk like snow. He was hiding, from her, from the company, from the implications of a truth that changed everything. Richard Sterling, however, had not retreated. If anything, he had become more visible, more aggressive, stalking the halls of the company like a predator, sensing wounded prey. The interview that was supposed to humiliate a cleaning lady had instead exposed him as a man whose cruelty was matched only by his incompetence. But Sterling was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Patricia Morrison from Human Resources appeared beside Maria's cleaning cart, with the purposeful stride of someone bearing official business. "I need to speak with you." They walked in silence to a small conference room on the 23rd floor, away from the executive offices and their invisible surveillance network of ambitious employees, eager to curry favor with power. "The interview the other day," Patricia began, settling into a chair across from Maria. "I need to understand what happened." "What do you mean?" Patricia studied Maria with the careful attention of someone trained to read between lines. At 45, she had survived 15 years in corporate human resources by learning to navigate the treacherous waters between employee advocacy and executive demands. "I mean that Richard Sterling scheduled an interview to humiliate a cleaning lady, and instead discovered that said cleaning lady is Jonathan Harrison's daughter and possesses qualifications that surpass half our executive staff." Patricia's voice carried a note of professional admiration, mixed with deep concern. "That kind of coincidence doesn't happen in real life." Maria had been preparing for this conversation since the moment she walked out of the interview. "Are you asking if I planned this?" "I'm asking if you came to work here knowing who your father was." The question hung between them like a bridge. Maria wasn't sure she wanted to cross. Truth would provide clarity, but it might also destroy the carefully constructed narrative that had allowed her to survive 5 years in this building. "I found out 3 weeks ago," Maria said finally, "after my mother died, and you decided to apply for the executive assistant position because Richard Sterling's plan to humiliate one of us deserved to backfire spectacularly." Patricia's laugh was unexpected and genuine. You knew what he was planning." "I overheard a conversation between Sterling and Marcus Webb. They were discussing the entertainment value of watching a cleaning lady fail publicly. And you decided to turn the tables. I decided that 30 years of being invisible was enough." Patricia made notes on a legal pad, her expression unreadable. "The company is in a delicate position, Maria. This situation has implications." "What kind of implications?" "The kind that involve lawsuits, public relations disasters, and board meetings where very serious men in very expensive suits discuss damage control." Patricia set down her pen and looked directly at Maria. "Richard Sterling has filed a formal complaint alleging that you gained access to confidential information through your cleaning duties. He's claiming industrial espionage." The accusation hit Maria like ice water. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You demonstrated knowledge of client correspondence, meeting details, strategic discussions that executives assumed were private." Patricia's voice remained professional, but Maria could see sympathy in her eyes. "Sterling is arguing that you violated the terms of your employment contract by listening to conversations held in rooms I was assigned to clean, by reading documents left on desks in offices I was paid to maintain." Maria's voice rose with indignation. "If confidentiality was a concern, perhaps executives shouldn't discuss sensitive matters in front of people they consider invisible." "I agree, but Sterling has powerful allies on the board. His father, Robert Sterling, has been pushing for changes in company leadership for months." Patricia leaned forward, lowering her voice. "This situation gives them leverage against Jonathan." The political implications crystallized in Maria's mind with sudden clarity. Sterling wasn't just trying to destroy her. He was using her to attack her father. The interview, the humiliation, even the job posting itself had been designed not just to entertain, but to undermine Jonathan Harrison's authority. What does my father say about this?" "That's the problem. He's not saying anything. He's been unreachable since Tuesday." Patricia's expression grew more serious. "The board is scheduled to meet tomorrow. If Jonathan doesn't appear to defend his position, Sterling's faction may have enough votes to force significant changes in company leadership." Maria felt the weight of unintended consequences settling around her shoulders. Her quest for personal justice had inadvertently triggered a corporate war that could destroy the man she had spent 30 years resenting. That evening, Maria found herself standing outside Jonathan Harrison's apartment building in the Upper East Side. The address had been easy to find. Executives' personal information was readily available to employees who cleaned their offices and had access to their emergency contact lists. The building was everything she had expected. Limestone facade, doormen in a uniform that cost more than her monthly rent, lobby decorated with the kind of understated elegance that whispered of old money and older power. "I'm here to see Jonathan Harrison," she told the doorman, a distinguished man in his 60s who regarded her with polite suspicion. "Is Mr. Harrison expecting you?" "Tell him Maria Elena is here. He'll understand." 20 minutes later, she stood in the elevator climbing toward a confrontation 30 years in the making. The hallway outside Jonathan's apartment was carpeted in deep burgundy, lit by crystal sconces that threw prismatic rainbows across cream-colored walls. The door opened before she could knock. Jonathan Harrison looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, or tears, or both. But when he saw her, his face transformed with an expression of such desperate hope that Maria felt her carefully constructed anger waver. "You came," he whispered. "We need to talk." The apartment was a reflection of success tempered by solitude. Expensive furniture arranged with designer precision, but no personal photographs, no signs of family life, no evidence that anyone actually lived there rather than simply existed. They sat across from each other in leather chairs that cost more than Maria's annual salary. Two strangers connected by blood and separated by decades of choices neither could undo. "I looked for you," Jonathan said suddenly. After I came back to New York, I hired investigators, called every hospital in Barcelona, contacted immigration services. When? Maria's voice was sharp with skepticism. 1995, 1996. For 3 years, I spent more money than I care to remember trying to find Isabella. Trying to find you. His hands shook as he reached for a glass of whiskey that sat untouched on the side table. But she had disappeared, changed her name, moved, left no trail I could follow. She married. Luis Gonzalez. He adopted me, gave me his name. Maria's voice carried the weight of a revelation. She became Isabella Gonzalez and raised me to believe my father was a man who abandoned us. She was protecting you. From me. From my family. From a life that would have destroyed you both. Jonathan's voice broke. My father made it very clear what would happen if I ever contacted her again. And you chose money over family. I chose to believe that you would be better off without me. I chose to trust that Isabella was strong enough to build a life without my help. He looked up at her with eyes that held 3 decades of regret. I was 25 years old and terrified of losing everything I thought mattered. And now I've lost the only thing that actually did matter. They sat in silence as the city lights flickered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maria studied the man who had given her life, but never lived it with her, searching for traces of the young man who had promised to return to Barcelona, and never did. "Richard Sterling is trying to destroy you," she said finally. "I know. The board meeting tomorrow will probably be the end of my career. Sterling has been planning this for years. Your interview just gave him the ammunition he needed." Maria felt the bitter irony of the situation wash over her. She had come to Sterling and Associates seeking justice, but her actions had handed victory to the very man who represented everything she despised about corporate power. What if I testified, explained what really happened? Jonathan's smile was sad and tired. "You think they would believe you? A cleaning lady with a grudge against the executive staff. I think they might believe Jonathan Harrison's daughter with inside knowledge of Richard Sterling's character." For the first time since she had entered his apartment, Jonathan Harrison looked at Maria not as a stranger or a problem to be solved, but as the child he had lost 30 years ago and found again in the most impossible circumstances. "You would do that. For me, after everything." Maria thought of her mother, of the nights Isabella had cried thinking Maria was asleep, of the letters that were never sent, and the phone calls that were never made. She thought of 30 years of questions without answers and dreams deferred by other people's choices. But she also thought of Anna and the other women who cleaned these offices, who deserved to work without fear of humiliation. She thought of Richard Sterling's cruel smile and his plans to use human beings as entertainment. "Not for you," she said finally. "For them, for us, for everyone who's ever been invisible in this building." Outside, it began to rain, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Tomorrow, they would walk into a boardroom together, father and daughter, executive and employee, 2 people bound by blood and separated by choices, united finally in the fight against a man who had underestimated them both. The boardroom at Sterling and Associates was designed to intimidate. 40 feet of polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that had witnessed decades of corporate warfare. Oil paintings of company founders glared down from walls paneled in imported walnut, their stern faces serving as silent judges of the living men who now controlled their legacy. At 9 o'clock sharp, Maria walked into this temple of power, wearing the same black dress she had worn to her mother's funeral, and carrying a leather briefcase that Anna had lent her for the occasion. Every eye in the room tracked her movement as she took the seat Jonathan had designated for her, not in the gallery where observers typically sat, but at the table itself, among the decision-makers, The board members were exactly what central casting would have ordered for a scene about old money power. Robert Sterling, Richard's father, occupied the chair at the head of the table like a king holding court. At 73, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that came from 6 decades of having his opinions matter more than other people's feelings. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Savile Row suit impeccable, his pale blue eyes sharp with intelligence and cold with calculation. To his right sat Margaret Chen, the only woman on the board, whose family's banking fortune predated the American Revolution. Beside her, Thomas Morrison represented old steel money from Pittsburgh, his thick hands bearing the calluses of someone who had started in the factories before inheriting them. James Fletcher, pharmaceutical wealth from Boston, studied Maria over reading glasses that cost more than her monthly rent. Richard Sterling sat across from Maria, his carefully controlled expression betraying nothing of the rage she knew must be burning beneath the surface. His humiliation in the interview had been complete and public, but men like Richard Sterling didn't surrender. They regrouped and attacked from different angles. Jonathan entered the room precisely at 9:15, moving with the careful control of a man walking to his own execution. He had regained some of his executive composure, but Maria could see the strain in the tightness around his eyes, the careful way he held his shoulders as if bracing for impact. "Gentlemen, Margaret," his voice carried its usual authority, but Maria detected an underlying tremor. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session." "Yes, well," Robert Sterling's voice possessed the particular brand of aristocratic condescension that only came from generations of inherited privilege. "Given the unusual circumstances that have come to light, we felt immediate action was necessary. Before we begin," Jonathan said, setting a folder on the table with deliberate precision, "I want to introduce Maria Elena Gonzalez Harrison. She is here today not as an employee of this company, but as my daughter." The formal acknowledgement sent ripples through the room. Margaret Chen's eyebrows rose fractionally. Thomas Morrison made a note on his legal pad. James Fletcher adjusted his glasses as if he needed to see Maria more clearly. "Yes," Richard Sterling said, his voice silk over steel. "We've heard the remarkable story. A cleaning lady who turns out to be the CEO's long-lost daughter. Quite the coincidence." "It's not a coincidence, Mr. Sterling." Maria's voice cut through the room with quiet authority. "It's justice." Robert Sterling leaned forward, his pale eyes focusing on Maria with predatory interest. "Justice, Miss Gonzalez, is it? An interesting choice of words." "Harrison Gonzalez," Maria corrected. "And yes, justice. For 30 years of abandonment. For 5 years of being invisible in my own father's company. For the systematic humiliation of employees who deserve better than to be treated as entertainment for board executives." "Ah," Richard Sterling's smile was razor-sharp. "And there we have the real issue. Industrial espionage disguised as family drama. I'm sorry. You gained access to confidential information through your position as a cleaning contractor. You used that information to manipulate your way into an executive interview. And now you're attempting to use your claimed relationship with Mr. Harrison to avoid prosecution." Maria had been expecting this accusation, but hearing it stated so baldly in front of the board still sent adrenaline coursing through her system. This was the moment when she would either vindicate 5 years of invisible service or watch Richard Sterling destroy both her and her father. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Sterling. I did use information I gained through my cleaning duties." Maria opened Anna's briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Information about your character, your methods, and your plans." She placed the folder on the mahogany table where everyone could see it. "For example, I have documentation of your practice of scheduling fake interviews with lower-level employees for your entertainment. Senora Rodriguez wasn't the first person you destroyed for sport. She was simply the most recent." Richard's face went white. "That's preposterous." "Is it?" Maria opened the folder and withdrew a printed email. "This is correspondence between you and Marcus Webb, discussing the comedy potential of interviewing janitorial staff for positions they could never qualify for. You called it teaching moments about social hierarchy." She could see sweat beading on Richard's forehead as she continued. "You also discussed your plan to use my interview as evidence of Mr. Harrison's poor judgment to support your father's bid for company leadership." Robert Sterling's expression had grown very still, his pale eyes fixed on his son with something approaching disgust. "Richard, this is obviously fabricated evidence. She had access to company email systems. She could have created these documents herself." "I could have," Maria agreed. "But I didn't, Because I didn't need to, you see, Mr. Sterling. When you treat people as if they're invisible, you forget that invisible people can see everything. She withdrew another document from the folder. This is a record of your expense account for the past 2 years. Private jets to Las Vegas charged as client meetings, $50,000 in entertainment expenses for a weekend in Miami that was supposedly a business conference, hotel bills from the Ritz Paris for a week when you were allegedly visiting our London office. Margaret Chen leaned forward, her banking instincts engaged. Those are serious allegations of expense fraud. They're also completely verifiable, Maria said. Because invisible people empty your trash, Mr. Sterling. We see the receipts you throw away, the itineraries you discard, the correspondence you assume no one else will ever read. Richard had gone from white to gray, his carefully constructed facade cracking like ice under pressure. This is harassment, character assassination. She's trying to destroy me because I exposed her espionage. No, Maria interrupted, her voice carrying 30 years of accumulated dignity. I'm exposing you because you represent everything that's wrong with corporate culture, because you treat human beings as disposable entertainment, because you've built your career on the suffering of people you consider beneath your notice. She stood up, commanding the room with presence that had nothing to do with title or position, and everything to do with moral authority. For 5 years, I've watched you humiliate employees, destroy careers, and manipulate situations for your own amusement. I've seen you take credit for other people's work, blame subordinates for your failures, and treat this company like your personal playground. Maria turned to address the full board. You want to know about industrial espionage? Mr. Sterling has been sharing confidential client information with his gambling associates in Las Vegas. You want to know about inappropriate behavior? He's been embezzling company funds to support a lifestyle that would embarrass Roman emperors. She placed the final document on the table, a photograph of Richard Sterling at a casino in Monaco, his arm around a woman who was definitely not his wife, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. This photograph was taken 3 weeks ago, when Mr. Sterling was supposed to be negotiating the Henderson contract in Switzerland. Instead, he was gambling away company money and sharing details about our client strategies with people who have no business knowing them. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Robert Sterling stared at his son with an expression of slowly dawning horror. Margaret Chen was making rapid calculations on her notepad. Thomas Morrison and James Fletcher exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their patience with the Sterling family's ambitions. These accusations, Robert Sterling said finally, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Can they be verified? Every single one, Maria replied. Because while your son was treating this company like his personal entertainment venue, I was doing my job, and my job gave me access to information that executives assume will never see the light of day. Richard Sterling stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. This is insane. You're going to believe a cleaning lady over a Harvard-educated executive. She's lying, fabricating evidence, manipulating you all. Sit down, Richard. Robert Sterling's voice carried the authority of a man who had controlled boardrooms for 50 years. You've said enough. Father, you can't seriously... I said sit down. Richard collapsed into his chair, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. Jonathan had remained silent throughout Maria's presentation, but now he spoke with quiet authority. The board has heard serious allegations against one of our senior executives. I propose we suspend Mr. Sterling pending a full investigation. Seconded, Margaret Chen said immediately. All in favor. Robert Sterling's voice was barely above a whisper. 5 hands rose around the table. Richard Sterling's career at Sterling & Associates ended with the soft sound of palms being placed on polished wood. As security escorts Richard from the building, Maria turned to face her father across the mahogany expanse. 30 years of abandonment hadn't been erased, but perhaps finally, they could begin the process of understanding what family might mean to 2 people who had lost so much time. So, Jonathan said quietly, what happens now? Maria looked around the boardroom, at the faces of powerful men and women who had just witnessed the daughter they never knew existed, destroy the man who had threatened everything they had built. Now, she said, we talk about what it means to see people who have been invisible for too long. 3 days after Richard Sterling's escorted departure from the building, Sterling & Associates hummed with the peculiar energy of an organization in transition, the gossip mill that connected every floor, every department, every coffee station buzzed with whispered conversations about the cleaning lady who had brought down an executive, the CEO who had discovered his daughter, and the seismic shifts in power that were still reverberating through the corporate hierarchy, Maria stood in what had been Richard Sterling's office, watching as facilities management removed his personal effects. The charcoal walls that had been designed to intimidate were being repainted in warm cream. The imposing black granite desk was being replaced with something more approachable. Even the lighting was being changed, trading Sterling's harsh spotlights for fixtures that would make visitors feel welcome, rather than judged. Symbolic, isn't it? Jonathan's voice came from behind her, carrying a note of wry observation. How quickly a space can be transformed when its occupant is no longer poisoning it. Maria turned to face her father, still adjusting to the surreal reality of their relationship. 3 days of careful conversations hadn't erased 30 years of abandonment, but they had begun the delicate process of building something resembling trust. Patricia Morrison is recommending a complete overhaul of our HR policies, Jonathan continued, settling into one of the chairs that would soon be replaced. Exit interviews with terminated employees, anonymous reporting systems for harassment, mandatory training for all executives on appropriate workplace behavior. And the board approved this, unanimously. Turns out that having your company's dirty laundry aired in a boardroom has a wonderfully clarifying effect on priorities. Jonathan's smile held no satisfaction, only exhaustion. We're also implementing a compensation review for all support staff. Ana Morales is being promoted to facility supervisor with a 30% salary increase. Maria felt warmth spread through her chest at the news. Ana deserved recognition that went far beyond financial compensation. But in corporate America, money was how respect was measured. What about the executive assistant position? It's yours, if you want it. Jonathan leaned forward, his expression serious. But I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. This company has 47 floors of institutional culture that won't change overnight. There will be executives who resent your promotion, employees who question your qualifications, clients who doubt your competence. Because I'm a woman, an immigrant, a former cleaning lady, or because I'm your daughter. All of the above. His honesty was brutal and appreciated. The Harrison name carries weight in this industry, but it also carries expectations. People will assume you're here because of nepotism rather than merit. Maria walked to the window that would soon be hers, looking out over a city that had never promised her anything, but had given her more than she had ever imagined possible. Let them assume. I've spent 30 years proving myself to people who couldn't see past their prejudices. I can handle a few more. The salary is $180,000 annually, plus benefits and performance bonuses. You'll have a staff of 3, an expense account, and responsibilities that span 6 continents. Jonathan joined her at the window. It's also a target position. Every ambitious junior executive in the building will see you as an obstacle to overcome. Are you trying to discourage me? I'm trying to be honest with you. About the job, about this company, about what it means to be my daughter in a world that will always question whether you've earned your place or inherited it. Maria turned to study his profile, searching for traces of the young man who had made impossible promises in Barcelona. What do you think my mother would say about all this? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. She would say that you're stronger than both of us ever imagined. She would say that you've already proven yourself in ways that matter more than corporate titles or executive salaries. And what do you say? I say that I've spent 30 years building a company and forgetting to build a life. I say that watching you walk into that boardroom and dismantle Richard Sterling's career with nothing but truth and courage was the proudest moment of my professional existence. He turned to face her fully. I say that if you want this job, it's yours by right of competence, not blood. The offer hung between them like a bridge spanning decades of separation. Maria understood that accepting would mean more than career advancement. It would mean stepping fully into a world that had excluded her, claiming a place at tables where her presence would be questioned, defending herself against accusations that she would never fully escape. But she also understood that refusing would mean allowing fear to dictate her choices, the same fear that had kept her invisible for 5 years. I accept, she said, on one condition, which is, I want to create a mentorship program for immigrants with professional qualifications who are working in service positions. I want to partner with community colleges to provide English language training and business certification courses. I want to make sure that what happened to me, 5 years of invisibility, doesn't happen to anyone else. Jonathan's smile was the first genuinely happy expression she had seen on his face since they had met. Consider it done. In fact, consider it the first major initiative of your new position. 2 hours later, Maria stood in the basement conference room where Mrs. Patterson had announced the executive assistant opening that had changed everything. But now she was addressing the cleaning staff, not as one of them, but as someone who had crossed the invisible line that separated service from management. "I know some of you are wondering what this means," she began, looking at faces that reflected everything from pride to skepticism to cautious hope. Whether things will really change, whether this is just corporate theater designed to make everyone feel better about business as usual. Anna sat in the front row, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Carmen clutched a tissue, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Chen nodded with the wisdom of someone who had seen many promises made and few kept. "I can't promise that everything will be different overnight," Maria continued. "Institutional change takes time, and there will be resistance from people who benefit from the current system. But I can promise that your voices will be heard, your concerns will be addressed, and your dignity will be respected." She paused, meeting the eyes of women who had been her colleagues, her support system, her family when blood family had been absent. "I also want to say that this position doesn't make me better than any of you. It makes me responsible to you, to use whatever influence I have to ensure that good work is valued regardless of the uniform it wears." After the meeting, Anna lingered as the other women filed out, chatting excitedly about the changes that might be coming. "You know this won't be easy," Anna said quietly. "They'll expect you to forget where you came from. Then they don't know me very well." "No, Mija, they don't. But they're about to learn." As Maria prepared to leave the basement conference room for the last time as a member of the cleaning staff, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The tragedy that had stolen her husband and her career. The desperation that had driven her to accept work she was overqualified for. The discovery that had revealed a father she had never known existed. But mostly she thought about her mother, about Isabella's fierce pride and uncompromising dignity, about the woman who had raised her to believe that circumstances might define opportunities but never worth. Tomorrow, she would report to the 36th floor as Director of International Relations for Sterling & Associates. She would sit in meetings with executives who had never seen her before, manage projects that spanned continents, and prove herself worthy of a position she had already earned through 30 years of persistence and 5 years of invisible service. Tonight, she would call her mother's sister in Barcelona and share news that would have made Isabella Gonzalez weep with pride and vindication. Her daughter, their daughter, was no longer invisible, and she was just getting started. 3 months later, the transformation of Sterling & Associates was evident in ways both subtle and profound. The building hummed with a different energy, still ambitious, still driven, but tempered now with something that resembled humanity. The service elevators that had once carried invisible workers now transported people whose names were known, whose contributions were acknowledged, whose presence was not just tolerated but valued. Maria stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility. The view from the 36th floor showed her the city she had fallen in love with 5 years ago, when she had arrived broken and desperate, seeking nothing more than survival. Now she saw it as a place where dreams could be rebuilt, where invisible people could claim their voices, where justice could be patient but inevitable. Her office was a study in purposeful contradiction. The mahogany furniture spoke of executive authority, but the walls displayed photographs of employees at all levels. Anna cutting the ribbon at the opening of the new employee training center, Carmen receiving her certification in business English, Mrs. Chen being honored for 30 years of dedicated service. The bookshelf held volumes on international law and diplomatic protocol, but also copies of immigration guides in 9 languages and resource materials for professional development programs. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Jonathan entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and the morning's trade publications. At 70, he moved with the measured pace of someone who had learned to value moments rather than simply endure them. The past 3 months had aged him, but in a way that suggested weight lifted rather than burden gained. "The Morrison Group signed," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk with the careful attention of someone still learning how to be a father. "Full 3-year contract. They specifically requested that you lead the international expansion planning. Because of my qualifications, or because I'm Jonathan Harrison's daughter. Does it matter?" He settled into the chair across from her desk, a position that had become their morning ritual. "You'll prove yourself either way. You always have." Maria smiled, accepting the compliment and the challenge it implied. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in corporate politics, cultural navigation, and the delicate art of earning respect while carrying the burden of assumed nepotism. Every meeting was a test, every project a chance to demonstrate that her presence in the executive suite was justified by competence rather than family connection. "The Employee Assistance Program is exceeding all projections," she reported, consulting the folder that had become her pride and joy. "We've placed 43 immigrant professionals in positions that match their qualifications. The Language Training Center has a waiting list 3 months long. 5 community colleges have requested partnerships. And the financial impact. Employee satisfaction scores are up 37%. Retention rates have improved across all departments. Client feedback specifically mentions our improved cultural sensitivity and language capabilities." Maria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. "We're not just doing good, we're doing well." Jonathan nodded, but she could see something else in his expression, a hesitation that had become familiar over the past weeks. "What is it?" she asked. "The board wants to expand the program nationally. Margaret Chen thinks it could become a competitive advantage that distinguishes us from other consulting firms." He paused, studying her face. "They want you to lead the initiative. That's wonderful news. It would mean travel, extensive travel, setting up programs in Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, Atlanta. You'd be building something from the ground up, creating systems that could help thousands of people." Maria understood the subtext. They had spent 3 months learning to be father and daughter, building a relationship that felt both natural and fragile. Extensive travel would test that connection, would require them to trust that what they had built could survive distance and time. "How long?" she asked. 2 years, minimum, possibly longer if it expands internationally. The offer represented everything she had worked toward: professional recognition, the chance to create meaningful change, the opportunity to transform corporate culture on a national scale. It was also a leap of faith into an uncertain future, with a man she was still learning to trust. "I need to ask you something," Maria said carefully. "Are you offering me this position because you believe I'm the best person for the job? Or because you're afraid that if I stay here, we'll run out of things to talk about?" Jonathan's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Your mother asked me the same kind of question once, about whether I loved her for herself or for the way she made me feel about myself. What did you tell her?" "That love was too complicated to have only one reason." His expression grew serious. "I'm offering you this position because you've already proven you can change corporate culture from the inside, because you understand what it means to be invisible and what it takes to become seen, because in 3 months, you've accomplished things that took me 3 decades to understand were necessary." He stood up, moving to the window where they often conducted their most important conversations. "But I'm also offering it because I spent 30 years avoiding the responsibility of being your father, and now I want to support you in becoming the leader I never had the courage to be." Maria joined him at the window, looking out over a city that had taught her that invisibility was often a choice, that justice required patience, but not passivity, that family could be built as well as born. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "about the night I found Mother's documents, about what I was planning when I applied for that job." Jonathan turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "I wanted to hurt you. I wanted to expose you as the man who had abandoned his pregnant girlfriend and never looked back. I wanted to embarrass you in front of your colleagues and destroy the reputation you had built." Maria's voice was steady, but she could feel the weight of the confession. "The justice I was seeking was personal. Selfish, revenge disguised as righteousness. And what changed? I met you. Not the image I had constructed based on my mother's stories, but the actual person, flawed, guilty, trying to do better than he had done before." She turned to look at him fully. "I realized that revenge and justice aren't the same thing, that destroying you wouldn't heal the wounds your absence had created." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances and were still learning what that meant. "I accept the position," Maria said finally, "on one condition, which is that we don't let distance undo what we've built here, that we remember family is a verb, not just a noun, that we keep trying to understand what it means to be father and daughter when we're starting 30 years later than most people." Jonathan's smile transformed his face, erasing decades of carefully controlled executive composure and revealing something that looked remarkably like joy. "Deal," he said, extending his hand with mock formality. Maria shook it, then stepped forward and embraced him, tentatively at first. Then, with the fierce affection of someone who had learned that love was often found in the most unexpected places, 6 months later, the Sterling and Associates Employee Development Initiative had become a national model for corporate social responsibility. Maria's office in Chicago overlooked Lake Michigan, and her team included former immigrants who had been discovered cleaning offices, serving coffee, and performing the invisible labor that kept corporate America functioning. She still spoke to Jonathan every Sunday, their conversations ranging from business strategy to family history, to the slowly unfolding story of who they were becoming to each other. Anna had been promoted again, and now oversaw employee relations for the entire East Coast operation. The blue box that had contained her mother's secrets sat on Maria's desk, transformed from a repository of pain into a reminder of the journey that had brought her home. Sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty and the city sparkled beyond her windows, Maria thought about the girl who had grown up in Barcelona, believing her father was a stranger who had never wanted her. She thought about the woman who had come to America broken and desperate, accepting invisibility as the price of survival. But mostly, she thought about her mother, about Isabella's fierce belief that her daughter was destined for greatness, despite circumstances that suggested otherwise. Isabella had been right, though not in the way either of them had imagined. Maria Elena Gonzalez Harrison had found her greatness, not in spite of being invisible, but because of what invisibility had taught her about seeing others. She had discovered that justice was most powerful when it lifted others, as well as oneself. That family was something that could be built even when it had been broken, and that sometimes the most important victories were the ones that took 30 years to achieve. The girl who had cleaned offices was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that power was most meaningful when it was used to make others powerful, that success was most satisfying when it created opportunities for those who had been denied them, and that the best revenge was not destruction but transformation. She was no longer invisible, and she was making sure that others wouldn't have to be invisible either. In the end, that was worth 30 years of waiting.